and welcome to episode number 281 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to say thanks to some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Stella Starr, Ash McLeod, Tammy Kepfler, Maddie Scott, V Johnson, Lee Clark, Coral Brooks, and Lee Johnson. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week. Our film review is Cuckoo. Cuckoo was released in 2024. It is 5.7 out of 10 on IMDb and 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. Reluctantly, 17-year-old Gretchen leaves her American home to live with her father, who has just moved into a resort in the German Alps with his new family. Arriving at their future residence, they are greeted by her father's boss, who takes an inexplicable interest in Gretchen's mute half-sister Alma. Something doesn't seem right in this tranquil vacation paradise. Gretchen is plagued by strange noises and bloody visions until she discovers a shocking secret that also concerns her own family. So as always with our film review, we're going to go likes, we're going to go dislikes, and look, this was such a strange film. It was a strange film. And it genuinely kept me guessing right until the end. But I am not entirely sure that that is necessarily a good thing, which I will explain more when we hop on over to the dislikes column, which will probably be sooner rather than later. I really liked Dan Stevens' character in this, right? Dan Stevens is an actor that I really like. He always seems to have a lot of fun in the roles that he plays. I think he takes on roles that are like fun and funky and a little bit quirky, and I respect him for that. His character in this is almost like panto villain, and it was genuinely fun. Like, I enjoyed watching him. I liked his kind of vaguely shit but also brilliant German accent. I was here for it. I also like a film where everything seems to be good on the outside, but underneath, you know, there's some dark evil shit going on, in that kind of Get Out kind of way, where everything just seems perfect, but there's this dark underbelly that feels like it's just hiding beneath the surface all the time. It's a good setup for a film. And there is a scary creature in this film. That is a spoiler, I'm sorry to say. And I liked the scary creature in it. I don't want to say too much about it in case people want to watch it. But there is a bike scene that really rattled me. And also, the monster itself was just uncanny valley brilliance. It was unexpected. I spent ages trying to figure out what the heck it was. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was new and fresh, and I respected that. I also thought the performances in general were decent, and they did well with what they had been given. Like, Hunter Schafer was good and convincing, and visually I thought this film was beautiful to look at. That's kind of it for the likes, to be honest. And I'm going to be really frank, I just couldn't really be arsed with this film. There was something deeply pretentious about it, and it just didn't quite work. And it felt like, I don't know, it felt like it was trying to be a real sort of arty, cerebral horror, and it just didn't quite get there. Like I said, I thought the monster was brilliant, but weirdly underused. Like, it lacked a lot of scares for a film that had the potential to be genuinely terrifying and unsettling. And yet I sort of had lots of periods of time within the film where I was like, what is happening, rather than feeling deeply unsettled when it should be deeply unsettling. The topic is deeply unsettling. If you think about the cuckoo as a bird that infiltrates the nest of another bird, kicks out the eggs and makes the mother bird raise its chicks, that should tell you that the subject matter should be really unsettling. But it wasn't. I just was a bit like, oh, I don't know what's going on. This is really confusing. The plot was just really unclear. And frankly, they had these swathes of exposition that happened from the characters, like Dan Stevens and this other policeman character. They're all fucking talking about what's happening and what's going on. And it did nothing to explain what was actually happening, virtually. So when I said that it kept me guessing, wasn't necessarily for all the right reasons. I also read a review where it said, where it listed off like plot points kind of in order of when they happened, and it genuinely was like somebody had mashed random incoherent words and ideas together when they were stoned. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of what this felt like. I also, fundamentally, right, I can kind of get past that stuff if I care about the characters. But I just didn't particularly care about any of the characters. You know, I wasn't that fussed about what happened to them, which is just bad writing in my opinion. Like, you need to have, I think, in a horror film, some sort of emotional connection to the characters. Whether that is, I hate them and I can't wait for them to die, or whether that is, I love them and I really want to see what happens to them, or I feel empathy for them. I just was a bit like, oh, boo. Like, I'm not connected to you. I don't really care what happens to you, okay? So basically, I'm going to give it 2.5 stars. That's 2.5 stars for Cuckoo. I don't even know if I'd recommend it. Like, it was fine. I do also think the majority of those 2.5 stars are purely for Dan Stevens. So, you know, if you enjoy him as an actor, it'll probably be fun for you to watch. But otherwise, I wouldn't be falling over myself to watch it, to be honest. Which brings us to our story this week. Now, for our story this week, we are joined in studio by the wonderful Tim Cloke. If you're new around here, Tim will explain who he is. And if you are a regular, you will know who Tim is. Just to make it clear, this episode was recorded using radio mics. So the sound quality might be slightly different than you are used to, but it's still absolutely fine to listen to. And please make sure that you go and follow Tim on all of his socials. I will leave the links to everywhere that you can find him in the description of this episode, and let's get into it. Today's episode is brought to you by Hormone Harmony. You were probably told that your health starts in your gut, but if you're a woman, it starts with your hormones. And I can tell you from experience that when your hormones are off, everything is off, including digestive issues, mood, energy levels, weight management, and so much more. Hormone Harmony is a game changer for women struggling with hormonal imbalances that leave them exhausted both physically and mentally. It only contains science-based ingredients that bring back comfort, energy, clarity, confidence, and a sense of balance. Happy Mammoth, the company that produces Hormone Harmony, is famous for its zero compromise policy. No GMOs, artificial fillers or flavours or any other junk. Only science-backed ingredients in amounts that are clinically proven. The company surveyed 1,831 women to see how Hormone Harmony helped them. And the results are pretty mind-blowing. 86% of women started losing weight, 77% say it improved their mood, and 100% said they're feeling like themselves again. Hormone Harmony has over 50,000 raving reviews from women all over the world, with 98% of them saying they'd gladly recommend it to their family and friends. You can try Hormone Harmony risk-free and get 15% off your first order with code GHOSTPOD at checkout. That's code GHOSTPOD for 15% off your first order. And I'm joined today in the real life studio by the wonderful, the magnetic, the awe-inspiring, the airplane-loving Tim Cloke.
Hello, Emma. It's nice to be back.
It's nice to have you here in real life, sitting in my sitting room.
This is a lot better than being on Zoom via webcam and trying to make out what each other are saying and doing.
Hoping that those pauses aren't going to come across in the record, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I know.
And we're just in so much more comfort. We've got interruptions from Hades. You've got a cup of tea. You've got a blanket on. Oh, it's just nice to be back, mate. It really is. I know,
it really is nice to have you back. As I try not to say this to you because I feel like it is unfair, but I do feel like you should just move back to Canterbury. We were talking about this the other night in the pub about how stupid it was that we only really became friends in the year before you left.
That's just how things work out sometimes, isn't it? But what is, I think, very telling is the fact that I've now been away from Canterbury again for as long as I lived here. And we're now really, really good mates.
Yeah, I know. It's almost like absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Absinthe or
well, both.
Yes, maybe. But no, it's been really, really lovely, and it's just so nice knowing that I can come back, and you're just another one of my really good mates who I look forward to seeing here. But it's a real treat to actually be doing a recording in person.
I know. It is such a treat. We also did go to the Battle of Britain Museum today.
We did.
Which was wonderful, and we talk all about it over on Patreon. That is a shameless Patreon plug.
Oh, that really is.
That I usually don't do shameless Patreon plugs, but that is shameless. We've decided to keep our pre-record, kind of pre-episode catch-ups over on Patreon, rather, where we are discussing dating, we're discussing cats, airplanes.
All sorts.
It's all happening.
Frankly, we're not even quite sure what we've discussed at some point. So it'll be a surprise for you. As it will be for us.
Everything got a bit hectic, as it always does in my life. So today, Tim is joining me. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know who Tim is, Tim, who are you? Why are you here?
I'm a history teacher from Devon, which means that I like doing stories which have got a historical basis. So all of my paranormal stories, they have some sort of history behind them. And I believe that the best credibility you can get from some of these stories is where you can back them with some historical evidence as well. And that's all good corroboration. I've been very fortunate that in the past I've done some episodes on my travels over Dartmoor from Devon, where, like I say, I'm from Devon, and so that is home for me. We've looked at various aspects of folklore. But recently, in the last year or so, we've done quite a few episodes looking at battlefield ghosts.
Yes, we have.
Which is something that you've had lots of requests for, but you've not really wanted to touch yourself.
No, because I do not have the historical knowledge, and I also don't have time to do the extensive research. And I am aware that there are people listening who have much more extensive historical knowledge than me that would be like, that's not true, or that's not accurate. And I would like to hand the reins of that over to somebody who has a better grounded historical knowledge. And therefore, if you're wrong, it's not my fault.
Well, absolutely. And I will be wrong at points, I'm sure. I mean, imagine my nerves when I was doing all that archaeological stuff about the ancient stones of Britain. Luckily, the feedback has been very good because it's something I'm interested in, but I wouldn't call myself an expert. But actually, on today's topic, this is something that I've been fascinated by ever since I could read, pretty much. So it's been a bit of a lifelong passion. And this started out just as another one of my battlefield ghost stories. That's how it started. And then I went down that traditional rabbit warren and found so many other leads on it. And I realized this is a much bigger thing. There's so many other bits coming off of this. Actually, it probably just deserves its own standalone episodes. So I've called this The Ghosts of the Few.
Oh, I'm a big fan of this already.
As I have done with my previous battlefield episodes, I'm going to give you a flavour of the battle before we get into the associated ghosts.
Right, let's go. I'm excited. Let's just get straight into it.
Sergeant John Wright was one of a small number of pioneers, though he and his comrades did not know it. In all human history, the biggest and most decisive battles have been decided between gargantuan forces, numbering tens or even hundreds of thousands of men. But Sergeant John Wright was one of less than 3,000 who were fighting on the front lines of this battle, though they were supported by hundreds of thousands of specialist personnel behind the lines. His military life was a curious one. He was part of a team, all devoted to each other, yet he also fought completely alone. His fighting lasted for months, yet it also lasted for seconds. His summer was spent in nervous tension, sometimes even boredom, but was punctuated by sudden moments of heart-pounding terror. So it was on a bright September morning, as he rested in his deck chair, waiting for the call. A telephone rang. He and all those around him tensed immediately, though none wanted to show it. 79 Squadron, scramble! A bell ringing, a frenzy of rehearsed confusion. Wright launched himself towards his Hurricane fighter, radio wires and oxygen hose whipping at his sheepskin boots as he ran. Before he had even reached the aircraft, its propeller was turning, and flames licked around the exhaust stubs as the engine caught with a splutter and then a throaty roar. "Good luck, Sergeant," said the corporal in charge of rearming and refueling his fighter as he hauled him onto the wing and then pushed his hanging parachute over the high coaming of the cockpit. Less than 2 minutes from when the telephone rang, Wright was peering past the nose of his Hurricane and waving the ground crew away as the fighter bounced precariously across the grass field as if impatient to feel the air under its wings. He checked his controls were free, ran up his engine and pointed his fighter's nose into the wind, along with 2 of his squadron mates. Together, in loose formation, they ran their throttles to maximum and bounded across the airfield until with a final leap the Hurricanes clawed skyward, tucking their landing gear asymmetrically inwards, wingtips waggling as the pilots reached for controls around their tight cockpits. In the Battle of Britain, every minute saved in getting airborne equated to another 2,500 feet in altitude. And if time equaled altitude, then altitude equaled life in the contested skies over Britain during the summer of 1940. In simple terms, the Battle of Britain was a fight for the country's very survival. Hitler had ordered his armies to, quote, prepare for, and if necessary carry out, an invasion of the British Isles, immediately following the Wehrmacht's shocked victory over France in the late spring. Despite what is sometimes said, Britain was not alone. Hundreds of Empire pilots and experienced men from occupied countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia had enlisted to help out. However, it was 600 or so modern fighter aircraft of Royal Air Force Fighter Command that would bear the brunt of the German attempts to clear the skies of resistance as a prelude to invasion. The British did have a few crucial innovations which helped to offset the German numerical advantage of around 2,500 aircraft of all types. Sergeant John Wright had been able to take off in his Hurricane with enough time to climb to fighting altitude as a result of the genius organisation of Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, who led Fighter Command's preparation for this fight. The German Luftwaffe had no concept that in this, the first battle decided solely by air combat, they were facing the world's first ever integrated air defence system, with a network of early warning radar sites, live updates of squadron strength and readiness, and an ability to redirect aircraft to an intercept after they had already taken off. It was a miracle of organisation, made possible simply with telephones and the huge number of professional and dedicated men and women using them. Once the fighter was in the air, though, each airman was virtually alone, relying on his eyesight and that of his squadron mates to see him through. Wright's Hurricane climbed at maximum continuous power high over the southern edge of London, 10,000 feet. Time to put on an oxygen mask as condensation gathered at the edges of the unheated and heavily framed Perspex canopy. London had not yet come under serious bombardment, and the smoke of coal fires, locomotives and industry created a mucky haze on the horizon, through which meandered the silver river of the River Thames. Wright kept an eye on the sky around him at all times, whilst keeping loose formation with the rest of his squadron as the ground controllers directed them towards the still unseen enemy. Turn heading 220 and make Angels 20, came the distorted voice of the controller on the radio. A northerly heading. They were catching the raiders as they returned from laying waste to another RAF airfield. 15,000 feet, and still they were straining to reach Angels 20, or 20,000. Suddenly, an excited yet measured voice on the radio. Bandits, 11 o'clock, slightly below us. Hundreds of the bastards. And then, that's enough, blow 2. Control, this is Gazelle Leader. Tally ho, bandits heading south-southeast, attacking now. That was the signal for the airwaves to be left clear. And once battle was joined, each man had only himself and possibly a wingman to fight for. The tiny specks of aircraft, sometimes picked out with a glint of canopy glass, grew rapidly as they closed head-on. Wright's squadron had assembled 9 Hurricanes to intercept the raid. Soon the German aircraft became more distinct, a rigid armada of bombers, with some gaps and some aircraft trailing thin strands of smoke, straggling. Wright's Hawker Hurricane was not the most advanced or fastest fighter the RAF possessed, but it was a joy to fly, a steady platform to shoot from, and capable of absorbing tremendous punishment. Hurricane pilots loved them and relied on them. As his aircraft made a shallow dive, the airspeed showed that it was easily exceeding 350 miles per hour and accelerating, as Wright turned the safety switch on his gun button to fire. A looser formation of twin-engine fighters raged ahead of the bombers in a protective screen, now jostling for a firing position. The ground controllers had done their job well, though. At least this time, for once, the Hurricanes had the height advantage and they had the sun at their backs. But 9 versus 150-plus enemies were still fearful odds. The raiders grew larger yet, and then, with alarming suddenness, they seemed to fill the glowing orange gun sight. Wright could imagine the German airmen squinting into the blinding light, trying to pick up the flight of Hurricanes as they dived into the fray. Wright's thumb depressed the gun button, and his Hurricane shuddered as 8 machine guns spat death at the rapidly approaching Germans.
Simultaneously, white-hot tracer fire slashed past his Hurricane as the lead German fighter snapped by mere feet away, shark-like snout blasting fire, and then a blur of black crosses on a sky-blue background. Twin-engine Messerschmitt 110s. The Hurricane was the superior fighter, but the German aircraft bristled with machine guns and cannon and was not to be underestimated. Wright banked his fighter hard and felt the gravitational forces press him like a giant fist into his seat as he fought to remain conscious. While his vision turned grey, he could still hear the frantic chatter all over the wireless. Blue 2, this is Blue Leader, keep up with me. Red 3, break, break! Blue 4, behind you! Another 110 slid beneath Wright as his vision steadied, and he rolled his Hurricane onto his back as the engine coughed briefly with the loss of fuel pressure. Hauling himself towards the gun sight, he fired off a 2-second burst of gunfire and saw bullets strike the very rear of the German fighter. He readjusted and prepared to fire again, and then a flash and a deafening bang. Wright never saw the aircraft that shot him down. Few airmen ever did. Oil spattered his windscreen as flames shot from beneath the shattered cowling and acrid smoke obscured his instruments. He felt as if a great hammer had struck him in the side, and he saw the many tiny holes that showed that a 20mm cannon shell had exploded against his armour plate, shredding part of his seat, ruining his parachute, and grievously wounding his left leg, which hung limp on the rudder pedals. As sensation returned, Wright felt his boot filling with warm blood that soon became sticky in the cold of the altitude. Hurricane P-3676 was no longer capable of flight. "For Christ's sake, John, get out!" came the call on the radio, unaware that bailing out was no longer an option. Wright faded in and out of consciousness as he brought his crippled fighter down for an emergency landing. He picked out a flat field and flew towards it. Not that Wright knew it, but this was Tolworth recreation ground. As the field grew closer, he saw through fading vision the stunned outline of children on the field. As his Hurricane turned away from the field, one shattered wing dipped, stalled, and then the aircraft cartwheeled between the houses of Wentworth Close, Surbiton, on the outskirts of London. Sergeant John Wright's broken body was rescued from the twisted remains of his fighter. He died the next day. He was 24 years old. John Wright's story could stand in for any of the over 3,000 aircrew of all nations who died in the Battle of Britain. Unlike any battle before, here the front line was not fixed, and the battle played out in 3 dimensions, the skies over Britain in the summer of 1940. That anybody's earthbound spirit could remain attached to a battlefield of such vast scale seems impossible, and yet paranormal stories associated with the battle or the air fighting that followed it are far from rare. I have therefore restricted these stories to just one of the many RAF airfields that took part in the battle, and perhaps the most famous of them all, RAF Station Biggin Hill. Established in 1917 to the south of London, its job in the First World War was to defend the capital, and that had not changed in the Second. 454 aircrew flying from Biggin Hill were killed in the Second World War, but many men and women, civilian and military alike, were killed in air raids on the airfield too, with one raid alone taking the lives of 39 men and women and injuring another 27. The emotional attachment these people felt to their airbase makes it unsurprising that so many ghostly sightings have been reported ever since. In this task of telling the story, I am indebted to the work of Bob Ogley, who wrote a very personal and touching history of RAF Biggin Hill. The majority of this book is dedicated to the individual stories of those who lived and served there, but in keeping with the title, Ghosts of Biggin Hill, it contains valuable information about various reported hauntings associated with the base. This, combined with my knowledge of the subject, which has been something of a lifelong fascination, and cross-referenced with my own historical research, has provided a valuable basis for the stories which follow.
We talked a lot about this today in terms of these young fellas who are often, late teens, early 20s, sort of sitting around in between times waiting for a call. And they got the call and there was a strong possibility that you weren't going to come back from that.
Yeah. And these are lads who you'd think twice about giving a driving licence to.
Yeah. Like young fellas, like boys. And they're flying these planes. And we also talked a lot about, because I guess the logistics and the physics of these machines is not something that I have any knowledge of. So we talked a lot about the amount of skill and knowledge and clear thinking that it would have taken to fire off a shot.
Yeah. And just instinct as well.
And instinct and intuition. It was phenomenal. It was phenomenal what they did.
I've tried to give a sense here because that is the true story of what we know of Sergeant John Wright's final mission. And that sense as well, that if you are fixated on one target and you're trying to line it up, it is so easy for someone else when you're moving at so many hundreds of miles an hour.
Because you are putting your entire focus into trying to hit that one target, but you don't know if you're in a target for somebody else.
No.
Also, blood pooling in his boots. Good touch.
But this is based upon the wounds that are recorded that he suffered.
Hideous.
It's awful. I mean, it's easy to forget that these are not fleeting. Well, they are fleeting targets, but they're not just machines that they're shooting at. They know that there are human beings on board there. The most sure way of bringing down an enemy is killing the pilot. Yeah. And that's not necessarily what many pilots aim for. Some certainly did. But they're all at that risk. We saw, didn't we, the buckled remains of the armour plate, which they belatedly fitted inside the planes to try and help. Yeah. And it's chilling, isn't it?
Really, really chilling.
So in the previous battle we've talked about, it is very much hand-to-hand. It's grisly. It's awful. But this is in its own way, isn't it?
It's. I mean, these dogfights. Why were they called dogfights?
Well, it's not a very nice reason, but you think about in a traditional dogfight, each dog is trying to get on the other's tail and they're circling each other. And in the First World War, that was how you tried to get on each other's tail to
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I did. I asked this question to somebody recently. Why were they called dogfights? Yeah. But they didn't know the answer.
Because in theory, if it was one-on-one, it's about trying to circle each other and find a weak
maneuver,
spot.
Yeah.
And then, bang, you get the enemy.
How interesting. Okay, yeah, no, that is interesting.
Really, the description or the metaphor doesn't work well for a Second World War fight because it's not one-on-one. You are fighting as small units. If you get isolated, then you're in a lot of trouble.
Because I read that in the museum where it was paramount that you were protected at all times.
Yeah, minimum
Nobody
two.
flew alone. Yeah. So I imagine then being on your own would have been a disaster.
Well, typically that's how your mission ended. Everyone was moving so quickly in relation to each other that there would be a few minutes at most of complete frantic terror. Yeah. And you've only got 15 seconds worth of ammunition on the British fighter
which that blew my mind as well.
So once you're out of ammunition, or once you've lost contact with all other aircraft, you typically were on your own, and you thought, well, I better just keep an eye on the air around me and make my own way home. Ideally, you'd want to stay with your formation, but if you'd entered a fight, you try and stick with your wingman, but often that wasn't possible, especially if they've been shot down. It's so terrifying, and yet it's so individual.
Yeah.
It's not like you're in a massed ranks of 300, 400 other people. There's maybe 12 of you.
Yeah.
But the consequences being just as decisive.
It does blow my mind.
It is. I could really see that at the museum today. I could see that you were really looking at these machines and thinking of the people in them.
The other thing, right, when we were in the museum today, they're really small.
They're really small, aren't they? Yeah.
Not museums, the aircraft, I mean. They're just smaller than I had imagined. Yeah. I knew they weren't like big jets, you know what I mean? I knew they were small. But when you see them up close, you're like, oh, that's quite a small weapon to be flying around in. And if that goes down, you know, there was various aircraft that we looked at today where you were saying like that it was impossible to eject from in the air.
Yeah.
Like there were so many flaws that they figured out because people died.
Oh, well, there were no ejection seats. If you had to bail out, you physically had to unclip yourself. Climb out. I'm in the strange position of having seen someone bail out of a Second World War fighter which subsequently crashed. This was after a collision at an air show. And he struck the tailplane as he left. Luckily, he was wearing a helmet and it didn't knock him out by some miracle. And he had seconds to pull his ripcord and the parachute opened and he was fine. He had a concussion, but he was otherwise absolutely fine. But, you know, if your aircraft was sufficiently damaged that it was no longer flyable, you couldn't guarantee you did that. In the case of Sergeant John Wright, his parachute was ruined and he still had the presence of mind to go, all right, I need to force land rather than anything else. And it is true that he avoided that group of children on the recreation ground and it probably cost him his life. But this is the sort of thing that happens in a very condensed amount of time. That entire mission probably lasted no more than half an hour. Yeah. It's a very, very unique set of circumstances that the world had never experienced up to that point. It's got that sense of terror and of sacrifice and of emotional strength that all other battles have always had.
Yeah.
But as we're going to see when we come onto some of the stories later on, there's an incredibly important dimension of women who took part in the battle as well, in a way that they, whether we like the sound of it or not, there was an equality here in the sense that by serving on an RAF airbase in uniform, doing vital work, they were legitimate military targets too.
Yeah.
And they knew that. But it's another chilling aspect to it, which people, especially at the time, simply had never really experienced before. So I hope it's a topic that people will find interesting and the stories are going along with it.
Oh, can we get into the stories now?
Should we get into it?
Yeah.
There's a real variety here, and I could only pick a few. But these are all ones which are recorded in this book or I've researched separately, but most of them have started in this book. But as I've always tried to do, I try to cross-reference it with the history and see, is there a basis to this? And I'm happy to say, in all of these cases, there is.
Obviously.
Our first story concerns the station chapel. St George's Chapel was built at the same time as many other buildings on the station, in simple red brick and terracotta. Situated on the other side of the road running past the airfield, it is more publicly accessible than most RAF buildings and, as such, has become something of a pilgrimage site for former service people, their families and those who simply want to pay their respects. Its decoration is simple and austere compared to the ancient churches elsewhere, but this is in keeping with its purpose as a place of reflection and prayer for those who served at Biggin Hill. In 1983, St George's came under the charge of the retired Wing Commander David Duval, who took to supervising the refurbishment of the wooden reredos behind the altar. Incorporated into it are boards which display the 454 names of aircrew lost serving on operations from Biggin Hill between 1939 and 1945. These rolls of honour were sent for restoration, checked and rechecked before being mounted once more on the reredos. One late afternoon, Wing Commander Duval was working in the vestry at the side of the chapel before closing up. It had been a quiet day, and he wasn't expecting any visitors so late. But in any event, the irritating squeal of the sprung door always warned him of the entrance of those hoping for a last look around the chapel before it was locked for the evening. Duval was surprised then when he came out of the vestry to see a lone figure standing by the recently remounted reredos. He was a young man, but very scruffy and unkempt. For a moment, Duval supposed it was someone who may have been sleeping rough, but then he saw that he was wearing a tattered overcoat and the distinctive powder blue of the Royal Air Force. Duval approached the man. "Can I help you, sir? I hate to rush you, but I was about to lock up for the evening, unless there's something I can do for you." The man turned to him and asked calmly where he could find a Wing Commander James Hogarth Slater. Duval found the squadron crest for number 611 West Lancashire Squadron and the silver-painted lettering of the deceased man's name. Wing Commander Slater had fought in and survived the Battle of Britain and was a newcomer to Biggin Hill when on the 14th of March 1943 he took his Spitfire on a probing attack over northern France. These attacks were always unpopular, designed as they were to draw out German fighters. The losses were high, and they achieved very little. Returning from the patrol, Slater's Spitfire was bounced by a Focke-Wulf 190 fighter in a surprise attack. He, along with another experienced squadron mate, were killed. Wing Commander Slater's Spitfire slammed into the English Channel. His body was never found. That night, the lads had been due to attend a special visit from the dancers of the famous Windmill Club, who were bringing their risque show to the squadron mess hall. The show was called off. Nobody felt much like celebrating. Duval sensed that this lonely figure wanted to take some time alone, perhaps being a relative of Wing Commander Slater, being too young by far to be a comrade. He decided to sort some paperwork and lock up a little later than usual as soon as he heard the door squeal open again to signal the man's departure. But no squeak of hinges was heard, so he headed out to politely escort the visitor back out. But the man had disappeared. This would not be the last time he would be seen. And on the third appearance, a mysterious German inscription had been scrawled into the visitor book. This was easily put down to coincidence, but nobody had been able to connect the comment to any visitor or the chapel that day. Shortly after the third appearance of the scruffy man, Duval received a nervous and urgent-sounding call from one of the Women's Royal Air Force staff at the guardroom across the road. On heading over, he found the usually unflappable RAF guards in animated discussion. They reported to him that an unknown man with staring eyes, unshaven face, and wearing a scruffy overcoat had appeared unexpectedly in the usually secure guardroom. He had asked a question which nobody had been able to answer, but as they went to find the necessary paperwork, a chill gripped the air, and the man simply disappeared. This had to be the same spectre as had appeared at St George's Chapel. The plot was thickening all the time. A few days after this most recent and most alarming encounter, the chapel caretaker reported that he had found a significant error on the Roll of Honour. An amateur historian of the airbase, he had identified that Wing Commander James Slater's inscription was missing the letters AFC for Air Force Cross. It had stuck out because it was an unusual award. It was unusual for a pilot to receive this prestigious award in the Second World War, the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Distinguished Flying Medal being far more common. David Duval sent for the draftsmen to urgently correct this unfortunate and quite serious omission of this man's record. The man in the trench coat has never appeared since. If the apparition was the spirit of Wing Commander Slater, or perhaps one of his squadron mates, it had at length succeeded in drawing attention to the error and ensuring that Wing Commander James Hogarth Slater is properly commemorated at the airfield that he had left 40 years earlier, never to return.
I forgot that I am actually mic'd.
Yeah, you made a funny noise there.
And I made a noise earlier as well where I was like, sorry if that is annoying coming across on the record. I will keep my reactions to myself for future...
I quite like them.
for future story reading. Do you know what? If you're somebody who has died for your country and they didn't commemorate you properly, I'd be coming back to haunt the shit out of people too.
It's an innocent mistake.
It's an innocent mistake, but it's still a mistake, and it's still a no. I deserve to be recognised for what I did, especially on a mission that were predominantly a waste of time.
Yeah, they really were a waste of time.
And they would have known. The pilots would have known. I'm doing what today? Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Great. Probably not going to come back then, am I?
The commander in charge of those missions, he's come in for a lot of criticism since, because he was essentially just wasting men's lives on an ego mission. And it's often bad to speak ill of the dead, but Trafford Lee Mallory, who will get a mention later, he really didn't know what he was doing. He was not a capable commander, and yeah, I'll leave it at that for now, because he does get a mention later on. But when I first read the story, my reaction was, well, why did he wait 40 years? And then I realised it's because they'd just restored it. The mistake hadn't been there before. So when they restored it had been restored incorrectly. So that is potentially the reason why he hadn't appeared in the previous 40 years.
There was no need for him to appear.
Because it had been correct.
Yeah, because he was being commemorated properly.
But someone who maybe is a little bit less, maybe a skilled craftsperson, but less familiar with Air Force decorations, would have seen AFC with everyone else saying DFC or DFM and gone, well, it should say DFC, and just corrected it, but in fact made an error. So that might explain why he turned up.
That makes a lot of sense. But imagine, right, if you were your man who saw him in the chapel first, you go across the road and they're all fucking freaking out.
Yeah.
Like some fella appeared. What do you look like?
Oh, it's him.
It's the same guy.
Yeah. And the German inscription things, I've not included things out of artistic license if I can't find what they were. I was unable to locate what the German inscription was in the book and whether it's got any relationship to it. But it's another weird...
That is weird.
Coincidence. I mean, it's not especially unusual for German veterans to come over, visit and pay their respects as well, because actually often their comrades are buried around here. I've been in churchyards around Kent and seen where some of them are buried and commemorated to this day, because as obviously evil as their course were, these are still young men who lost their lives.
And they were young men who were still fighting for their country.
Absolutely.
And fighting for probably what they genuinely believed
totally.
was right.
They'd been raised to believe it was right. And actually we do know several cases of the Battle of Britain where they absolutely did not believe in that particular course, and it used to get them in trouble. And there was a squadron where they overpainted the swastikas on their planes, and it got them in all sorts of trouble.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a small act of resistance, but a brave one. Rare, it has to be said, those acts of resistance. But you do get those sense of reconciliation, which we'll touch upon again. But this would really matter. You know, you get this record right, and there was an innocent mistake made, and it has now been corrected, and he's never been seen since.
See, I believe that. I'm not even going to try and, I'm not even going to try and rationalise that. I've just decided that's a real ghost.
And a lovely
that's the
story,
kind of shit
I think.
I'd be doing.
Yeah, I think I like the resolution to that one. I really do.
It's like I do that thing where when I go to an appointment or whatever, and they're like, I've never been a Mrs.
Yeah.
That has never been my title, right? But when people go Ms. or Mrs., I'm like, sorry, it's actually Doctor.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't care.
I've earned that.
I don't care what people think of that. I've earned it.
That's
I will
a
use it.
Really good comparison. I think it would.
I mean, not the
feeling
same.
would be much the same.
I'm not going flying over France to
Thank
lure out
goodness.
German fucking fighter pilots. That's not happening. However, I do understand the petty importance of getting the title right.
Yeah.
So I'd be back hunting the shit out of people too.
And it seems to be that Wing Commander Hogarth would agree with you. I mentioned the German airmen, and we are possibly going to head in that direction now, if you are ready for the next story.
I just remembered what we were in the middle of talking about when we got interrupted.
How has this happened?
It's just occurred to me. Sorry, on Patreon, we were in the middle of a conversation, we got interrupted, and then neither of us could remember what we were talking about. I've just remembered.
Oh, okay. Well, we should go over that later?
We'll go over that later.
If we've got time. We'll do it in the car. The nature of air warfare is such that the dead lie scattered and sometimes undiscovered all over the countryside for years after the event. When Winston Churchill uttered, at first unrehearsed in a private moment to his driver, that never in the field of human conflict had so much been owed by so many to so few, he meant it. The Royal Air Force triumphed in the battle, much to the salvation of the free world today. This victory required great sacrifice on the part of Allied forces and, just as necessarily, resulted in the deaths of many young German aircrew too. Their fates were just as horrifying, with the terror amplified by the nerve-shredding experience of flying over enemy territory while low on fuel or coaxing damaged bombers and fighters back to their bases in France. By August 1940, some Luftwaffe personnel were struggling even to climb into their cockpits. Such was the exhaustion, but also the fear of repeated raids against targets that seemed as well defended as ever. They came up with a word to describe this form of combat fatigue: Kanalkrankheit, or channel sickness. The feeling was doubtless accentuated by the constant assurances by their high command that the RAF was down to its last 50 fighters, only to find their bombers constantly harried to and from their targets by squadrons of Hurricanes and Spitfires, 8 or 12 at a time, biting away at the exposed edges of their formations. To be shot down meant fiery death, or at best to suffer long years of confinement in a prisoner of war camp. In 1981, Biggin Hill residents Ian and Kim Cross had organised a special Tell Your Ghost Story event at the local squash club and bar. This had been instigated by Kim after she had experienced interrupted sleep which had the overtones of ghostly activity relating to the airfield. It was well attended, with several mostly civilian attendees sharing their uncanny experiences. One tale was told by Barbara Robbins, who had been taking her collie dogs for their regular walk down Polsteeple Hill into the valley by the airfield. Biggin Hill, often called Biggin on the Bump, is surrounded by shallow valleys, and inevitably aircraft have crashed there either in accidents or due to enemy action. One evening, as Barbara went into the woods known as the Grove, her collies froze and raised their hackles. A sudden cold enveloped them, and the normally compliant dogs simply refused to go any further. Eventually, she led them up another way. The air warmed, and they continued their walk. The next day, in precisely the same place, the same thing happened again. Previously, Barbara had been inclined to trust the instincts of such an intelligent breed of dog, but she had had enough. She dragged the dogs as far as she could before she felt the temperature drop even further. But this time, the dogs were staring into the woods, growling, with their bodies pressed hard into the earth and fallen leaves. On a third time, the dogs took fright so violently that they slipped her grasp and ran away. The cold returned, and then Barbara felt a heavy coat or cloak being placed around her shoulders, and a voice with a heavy accent said to her, "Don't be afraid." But afraid she was. Terrified, in fact. She eventually spoke to a fellow Bigonian, Peter Richardson, who remembered the war, having lived through it as a child. He revealed that in September 1940, a single-seat Messerschmitt 109 fighter had been shot down in those woods, its pilot killed instantly. Richardson later recalled, "Us kids went to have a look at the souvenirs, and I got the rudder with the swastika on it. But eventually I had to surrender it to the British pilot who had shot it down." Could Barbara Robbins have encountered the spirit of the Luftwaffe airman who was killed trying to nurse his damaged fighter back over the channel?
Perhaps the placing of his coat around her as she shivered in the cold was an act of reconciliation from beyond the grave.
I now know what a Messerschmitt 109 looks like.
You've seen a couple of them.
Know. I've
Yeah.
seen them today. I am aware of what they look like. And we talked about souvenirs.
We did.
It is fascinating that people went, and because you could see swastikas and stuff that were clearly panels cut out
Yeah.
of planes in the museum, where obviously people had gone, I'm going to take that as a souvenir, which is wild. But like, you know, it's like we said earlier, a lot of those German soldiers and pilots, they were just men. You know, the regime was obviously evil. All of those fighting were often just
They were
men.
They were often very indoctrinated men.
Yes,
they
indoctrinated
had their own
men,
unpleasantness, and they were lads who were probably very lovely as well. Did you notice on any of the displays large German greatcoats being worn by some of them as well?
Yeah.
So if you think about that, with the uniforms, it's very much a part of the uniform.
Yeah, those big
You could imagine it.
greatcoats, yeah. And obviously, it is an act of warmth and an act of care to try and warm somebody up when you see that they're cold.
For the third time as well.
Yeah.
She'd been back several times. So,
Yeah.
you know, if you believe that that's what was going on, you would have seen it. And seen,
Also, just to be
Go
clear,
on.
if your dog alerts to something and they are responding in a negative way,
yeah, don't ignore that.
don't ignore that. Animals are so fucking clever. Collie
Especially
dogs,
border collies. They're smarter than smarter than most people I know.
They are smarter than most people. They are so clever. And I've told you, obviously we've had lots of haunting stuff going on in this house, and I mentioned it on Patreon, said I wasn't going to talk about it anymore. It is still occurring.
Yeah.
And Hades Ozenbrook is an alerter.
Yes.
He will know when something's going down, and he alerts to it. He will often do that thing he did with you earlier with me, where he will alert to something and then he will bring me to where he has heard it, stopping to see if I'm following every couple of steps, and he will scope out the room where he has heard whatever it is. And animals know. Okay, so
he's a bright boy.
He's a
Lily
bright
wouldn't know.
boy. No.
Not my cat. No. But he's a bright boy. He knows what's going on.
Yeah, and they just know. They know things. So if my collies are in the cold and they're freaking out, I'm not going any further. I'm going, okay, kids, I get it.
I find it really sad as well, the idea of the spirit of a German airman in the woods so far from home.
So far from home, who never made it home, and who ended up on enemy soil on his own.
Most German airmen who ended up like that, they were buried locally. But at the request of the German government, most, unless the family specifically asked them not to, were reinterred in a different century. I think it's Brentwood, more centrally. So it was easier for families to go and visit them, which does make sense.
Yeah, that does make sense.
And also, there were some communities in the very aftermath of the war, they weren't happy about saying, well, why is he mixed in with our lads and that sort of thing. There wasn't a great deal of that. A lot of the time people kind of realised it. Even before I left Canterbury, I went for a walk over towards Faversham, and I just found the grave of a German airman in one of the local cemeteries that had a homemade wooden cross on it that was obviously still being painted and tended by the local people.
Yeah,
and
I think is lovely.
I looked up his story, and he died very, very unfortunately. He so nearly not reached safety, but so nearly landed his aircraft successfully, but it just clipped a hedge and burst into flames, and that was that. And he was pulled out of his cockpit by just local farmers. Yeah. And so they went, it's a 19-year-old kid. We'll bury him properly and give him some respect. But the fact that, as well, it's easy to, if celebrate is the wrong word, but certainly commemorate the people who were fighting on the side of freedom. It's very difficult to commemorate in the same way those who were fighting for such an evil. And if you do believe in people being tied to their place of death by unfinished business or whatever else, then it seems like a good candidate for me. But at least he seems friendly.
At least, again, they were just men.
Not a lot of laughs in this episode, is there, so far? We'll see what we can do about
Well,
that.
yeah, we'll see. Maybe we can inject some
Probably
terrible
not. It's
humour.
another battle story, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're always full of death and destruction.
And I always get that real sense of, and we talk about this every time, they were often just boys.
Yeah, just kids, really.
And I'm sure those farmers who pulled that German lad out of a cockpit, I'm sure they looked at him and thought, I know
Yeah.
many, many boys who are out fighting.
Yeah.
and thought, this boy is far away from home.
Absolutely. I think you got a sense as well at the museum today with the smallness of the aircraft and realising they were never designed for doing half of this stuff.
No.
But they were having to put their faith in the technology anyway.
Just hoping that you'd make it back.
Absolutely. But it's not just the men. And we're going to turn our attention to some of the women who served at Biggin Hill now. One feature of a Royal Air Force station that set it aside from most 20th century conflicts, or indeed most throughout history, is the way it put women very literally on the front line. The Women's Auxiliary Air Force had expanded massively in the lead up to war, and it had only grown since hostilities had commenced. The WAFs, as they were known, were denied the opportunity to fly and service the aircraft, though a few pioneers did work as pilots delivering aircraft from the factories. Instead, the WAFs fulfilled a myriad of support roles. They staffed the vital switchboards that were the equivalent of today's internet servers that kept the RAF's integrated defence systems communicating. They worked in support and medical roles on the air bases. They plotted the progress of enemy raids at the radar stations and observer posts, and they marked the routes of enemy and friendly forces in the operations rooms and communicated with pilots in the air, including hearing their screams of agony when their cockpits transformed into blast furnaces of slipstream and fire. They had a direct supporting role to combat operations, and this made them legitimate military targets. They knew it, and they were unbowed. Biggin Hill was attacked multiple times throughout the Second World War, with the heaviest raids hitting in the summer of 1940. One of the heaviest of these occurred on the 30th of August 1940. Sergeant Helen Turner and Corporal Elspeth Henderson were at the plotting table in the operations room when the raid began. Despite its crucial role as a sector station feeding essential information to Fighter Command HQ, there had been no time to reinforce it. Turner and Henderson put on their helmets and carried on their duties as high explosives rained down, including into parts of the very building in which they were working. They stayed at their posts as glass shattered and roof beams tumbled down around them, continuing to feed vital information to the squadrons already deployed and airborne to counter the raid. Meanwhile, Sergeant Joan Mortimer was working at the switchboard of telephone lines that allowed her comrades to keep up the flow of information, the red lights blinking on faster than she could possibly connect them, with so many people demanding every possible scrap of information. Soon, a bomb crashed by her switchboard room with a terrifying crump, but it failed to explode. Mortimer hurried outside, marked the site of the unexploded bomb with a red flag, and then returned to her duties. In a related incident, another bomb cratered the runway, cutting the main phone lines. The WAFs headed out again, repaired the line while bombs continued to fall, and marked any further unexploded ordnance with more red flags to allow returning fighters to land, weaving between them. Prevailing attitudes had always denied women the award of bravery medals, but the Battle of Britain had changed this. All 3 WAFs were awarded the Military Medal, equivalent to the Military Cross for male officers. 8 years later, Eric Weeks was a young National Service conscript stationed at RAF Biggin Hill. He recalled an eerie incident in the winter of 1948 when he and a friend, George Surrett, were on night duty at the switchboard room. For good measure, they were joined by one of the station's German shepherd dogs, which had just had a litter of puppies. Eric recalled, towards midnight on this particular evening, and completely without warning, the PBX switchboard began to assume a mind of its own and go berserk. Lights flashed and high-pitched blips drowned out the urgency of our voices. As the dog in the hallway became agitated, we noticed the firmly locked metal door on the perimeter wall was sliding open, and the shadow of a figure was clearly visible. We sat almost rooted to the spot. Then, just as quickly as it started, the switchboard stopped flashing, and we gingerly went outside the room. The door was jammed open, and the dog was still cowering. The same pandemonium descended on the switchboard room on the subsequent 2 nights before peace returned, permanently on the 4th night. No technical examination of the equipment revealed any abnormality, and in any case, this couldn't account for the moving steel door or the shadowy figure who had appeared at the perimeter. Could this be replaying the chaos that descended upon the switchboard on August the 30th, 1940, when Sergeant Mortimer opened that same metal door to attend to the unexploded bomb? All 3 WAFs in this story survived the war, but perhaps the energy of that day has persisted. However, 3 Biggin Hill WAFs were less lucky,
and death could strike at unexpected times. The houses of Vincent Square were smart buildings built between the wars to house the servicemen and women of the airfield. Today, a conspicuous gap marks the place where a stray £1,000 bomb demolished some of the houses. Numbers 25 to 28 were being used to house unmarried WAFs, and all were destroyed, except the last, number 28. Years later, the new residents of number 28 Vincent Square had a series of strange experiences. Jackie Stillman reported that on one night in 1983, her sister Gina had a terrifying experience. Gina was staying to keep Jackie company in those nervous weeks while her husband Peter was on active duty during the Falklands War. After the houses had been remodelled, a door had been blocked in the wall that had adjoined number 27. Gina lasted just a few minutes in that room on the first night, hearing knocking on the wall where the old door used to be. Gina and her dog refused to enter that bedroom again. The odd occurrences didn't end there, though. When Peter Stillman returned home, after the war had finished, after all, it had been fought in 1982, and he and Jackie were sat in the living room when an old mantelpiece clock began to chime the hour. This wouldn't have been unusual, but for the fact they didn't own such a clock. In another house nearby, the spectral shadow of a woman in WAF uniform had been seen in the doorway, and outside the old NAFI refreshments building, a group of WAFs was once seen, visible only from the waist up, before they all disappeared without a trace. Given the large and vital contribution of the women of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, it should perhaps be no surprise that there are spectral reminders of them all around Biggin on the Bump.
I love the recognition of the importance of women in that period of time.
Mm-hmm. Could not have been done without them.
And it makes me really happy. Not the death part of it, obviously. So as I've spoken to you about before, my grandfather fought in World War II.
Yeah.
He was 17 when he went to fight, which is mental.
Yeah.
To be that young.
Mine was 60. They must have both lied about their age.
Yeah. My granddad and his best friend next door went off together and returned together.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Good.
Right, which is obviously incredible. And my grandmother was, because my dad is from Sheffield, my grandmother worked in munitions in Sheffield. And in Sheffield, there is a statue commemorating the women that worked in the factories that picked up, because, a whole generation of men were gone.
Yeah.
And the women were the ones that stepped in and took over. And there's a really great statue in this city in Sheffield commemorating those women. And I think it's so important to recognise that, yes, men went out to fight. Of course they did. That's, and for all those toxic men who do that thing where they're like, yeah, well, when conscription happens, but who set up the system?
Yeah. Were they allowed?
Men. Men set up the system, okay? So don't be going to me, where are you going to be when conscription happens? I don't think anybody should be conscripted, actually. That's just FYI, it's beside the point. But women were doing what they could too.
Yeah.
And I think that is an important thing to recognise. And women showed, like the story shows, intense bravery.
I remember the gasp that you made at the museum when you saw the size of the bombs. Yeah, I mean, we were looking at something else, and then all of a sudden,
bombs are big.
Yeah, we're talking about the sort of ones in the middle, the medium-sized ones, which are still horrifically large, being the sort that landed outside the operations block there. And just the thought of going, well, the switchboard still needs answering. I'll just go and mark it with a flag and hope that it doesn't have a half-hour delay on it, because they could fit fuses on them to disrupt rescue efforts deliberately with, say, a 24 or even 48-hour delay on them. So they were just still ticking away, quite literally.
God, war is awful.
It's just
war is awful.
Pure ingenious evil, isn't it? All of that sort of thinking. But the work that they did was so incredible. And also talking about people who should be getting recognition and sometimes do. I've mentioned already all the Polish pilots. The most successful squadron of the battle was a Polish pilot, a Polish squadron rather, number 303 squadron, which was crewed by Poles and Czechs and some others too. But they weren't even allowed to start the fight of the battle because their radio communications, among other things, were just so disruptive to the usual chitter chatter, as you might have heard in
in the story earlier, or the jargon that they're having. But as soon as they let them go out there, these guys didn't have anything to lose as far as they were concerned. Their countries were already overrun. Their families, they couldn't have any contact with them. So they just fought with utter ferocity. And we mentioned, didn't we, the Irish pilots who fought for the British, and the trouble and the lack of recognition that they got when they went home, because people might not be aware, of course, that Ireland was not in the Second World War. It was a neutral nation. They call it the emergency, don't they?
Yep.
Dublin was still bombed, supposedly accidentally, though many people would say that it was quite a cynical act by the German Air Force to do it. But there had just been, I don't know, I'm definitely preaching to someone who knows more about it now, but they had just fought really hard for their independence, which
and
they
there was
guarded
a huge
jealously.
Anti-British sentiment in
which
Ireland.
you can totally
Huge.
understand. Yeah, and yet there were some people saying, this is a bigger threat and I want to go out and do my bit. And
recognising if this happens, if Germany...
We're next.
Yeah.
And they would have been.
And there were I didn't realise, and it was only when I was doing the episode about Spike Island, I think, was that there were German plans to invade Ireland.
Yeah, totally.
Because it would have been a great vantage point. Of course it was.
Well, strategically, it's looking right out to the Atlantic.
Yeah, brilliant. Like, easy peasy.
Yeah, so many bases in Northern Ireland, of course, were anti-submarine bases for aircraft and for the Navy. There's that curious tension that quite a lot of time British aircrew and other Allied aircrew would be lost over Ireland, and German aircrew likewise would be picked up by the Irish forces, and essentially they would be put in camps together where they just have to get on until they were eventually released.
There's that huge sign, like a huge painted white sign in Ireland as well that says ERA. And it was, ERA is the Irish word for Ireland, and it was designed to tell German bombers, no, you've gone too far.
And frankly, American ones
Go
flying
back.
over as well. Yeah,
this is
absolutely.
we are not involved in this, thank
we
you.
want nothing to do with this at all. There is a certain cynicism to the idea that Belfast was raided several times very heavily, and Dubliners very bravely sent fire engines up to help fight the flames. And after doing that, and after it was publicised somewhat, funnily enough, German bombers appeared over Dublin and dropped a few bombs the next time. Which almost like, just be a bit careful here. Are you really neutral? There's the curious situation that British pilots were slightly more often weirdly released for compassionate or medical reasons than their German counterparts were, because really there were plenty of people who recognised this is the bigger threat here, especially as the war continued and more was known. And I know this isn't particularly paranormal content, but it's a fascinating part of it, and that sense of a memory. Well, there's the memory and the commemoration that we do all the time. And then, if you believe such things, there is the memory that's almost imprinted on these buildings.
Yes.
It's strange. That was very soon afterwards, isn't it? 8 years is no time at all, really.
No time at all. No time at all.
No.
We always talk about these stories and it's like 50 years later, 8 years is no time.
No time at all. I think it's really strange. The one about the guys I mentioned without explanation, NAFI is the Navy, Army and Air Forces Institute. They're sort of a charity that sort of supply cups of tea and bacon sandwiches and things to the forces on air bases.
Very important.
But yeah, civilian organisation, but supporting the air forces. The idea of those WAFs, Women's Auxiliary Air Force personnel, seen from the waist up only.
Yeah.
What is going on there? Because it's not as if the ground levels have changed, is it?
No, it isn't. And it's almost like a half-formed memory.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Where it's just not quite there. Like a half-formed thought. That's what it feels. Those things always feel like to me. And it is quite regular in ghost stories that they're like seeing somebody from the waist up or whatever. And often it's because floor levels have changed, or that's what people think. It's because rooms are different. You know, like this house is over 3 layers of kitchens. So that's like, this house has been generations and generations and generations of life buried underneath it. And obviously as time has gone on, the floor level has risen. Absolutely, and that's just the way it is.
Well, we had to step up into the living room to get here.
Yes, and the woman who developed this property has insisted to me multiple times that there's nothing underneath.
No, of course not.
And I was like, what's the door for then? There's a door on the other side of the house that leads to where exactly? Nowhere?
Whatever used to be there.
Whatever is under my fucking sitting room.
Should we just take up the floorboards now?
Oh my God, I'd love to.
If only we had the time, eh? The other bits I really like about those stories as well, I mean, it's quite an obvious thing, isn't it? But like there being a knocking at where there used to be a door to an adjoining house.
Oh, love that.
Because
Love that.
often if there was a large family, you'd just give them two of the houses and you'd have
Yeah.
doors that you'd unlock. A little bit you sometimes get in hotels now, like that now. But how many times have you been in an old house or maybe at a relative's and you hear an old mantelpiece clock chiming next door and you think nothing of it? But imagine hearing that when there is no house anymore next door and you don't own such a clock.
Oh, I think it's incredible.
Yeah.
And again, it's like a half-formed thought, isn't it? It's like the universe or whatever, just having this thought and spitting it out, and we have the luxury to hear it. I'm being very pro-paranormal today. I don't know what's going on.
I think I am as well. I think it's a museum visit. It's really immersed us today.
I think it might be that we're like, no, we've been there. We can see it.
That was definite research and not just us trying to meet the cat who lives there.
No. It was nothing to do with the cat. It was a business opportunity. It was work.
It was definitely work, yeah. But on that sense of like half-formed memories, there is a sense from many of the people who took part of wanting to remember. But we're going to focus on the thoughts of one particular really important person who is associated with the battle here, and his quite controversial views over what happened to the men that he commanded after they died.
Oh God, I'm excited.
So, by way of an extended epilogue, we will now consider a little talked of trait of RAF Fighter Command's leader during those desperate days in 1940. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
His name was Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Caswell Tremonier Dowding. Aged 58 by the time of the Battle of Britain, he had had a successful, if somewhat unsung, career in the Royal Air Force up to that point. He had served as a fighter pilot with considerable bravery over the trenches of the Western Front in the First World War. This gave him a real empathy and connection to those that he commanded, who he affectionately referred to as his dear fighter boys and his chicks. Dowding had a meticulous and analytical mind, but he had little desire to engage in the politics of high command. His serious nature had led to him receiving the nickname Stuffy from all who served with him, but he was uninterested in his reputation, only in results. He calculated with scientific precision the amount of warning time the radar stations provided and how many squadrons he would need to defend the country from an all-out attack of the kind faced in 1940. This led him to clash with Winston Churchill over the supply of additional fighters to defend France, an unpopular decision with the politicians, but one born out of military necessity as it became clear that France would succumb to the German blitzkrieg. His air defence system, known today as the Dowding system, was a marvel of economy and efficiency, and it effectively amplified the strength of RAF Fighter Command, turning it into a military machine for destroying Luftwaffe raiders with the remorseless efficiency of a meat grinder. Despite this ruthless organisation, he was deeply troubled by the loss of so many young people to achieve victory in the Battle of Britain. Preoccupied as he was with the job of winning the battle, he and his subordinate, Air Officer Commanding of No. 11 Group, Sir Keith Park, were oblivious, willfully or not, of the political vultures that circled them even in their moment of victory. Dowding and Park were unceremoniously sacked by Churchill at the end of November 1940, at the behest of their replacements, Sholto Douglas and Trafford Leigh-Mallory. Leigh-Mallory had clashed with Dowding repeatedly over tactics throughout the battle and would be singly ineffective in his new command before the RAF was belatedly relieved of his attentions by an Alpine air crash in 1944. And so, unwillingly, Dowding went into retirement and began to engage in his other interests. He showed a surprisingly sensitive nature for a military man, not least one of his generation. He became a vegetarian and petitioned Parliament for the humane treatment of animals. With time on his hands, he devoted himself increasingly to an interest in spiritualism. Even before his retirement, he had confided in close associates the anguish that he had from the alleged contact with the spirits of some of his dear fighter boys, who had perished in the battle he was commanding. His guilt at so many losses only fueled this, and he ended up rejecting conventional Christianity in favour of theosophy, advocating for belief in reincarnation. He spent his time writing 4 books on the subject, Many Mansions in 1943, and in 1945 one called Lichgate, and another called The Dark Star, and finally God's Magic. Some of his former allies began to distance themselves from Dowding over his spiritualist beliefs, but Dowding was undeterred.
His attempts to commune with his dear fighter boys he had commanded gave him an outlet for his grief and his guilt, and Dowding had never much troubled himself with the opinions of others anyway. Dowding faced further alienation as he announced to some of his few remaining associates that he had become a member of the Fairy Investigation Society, which sought to prove the existence of fairies in the natural world. By this point, Dowding was being openly called a crank, even by those who respected his military achievements. But this quiet and sensitive man continued in his convictions, once writing of his belief that fairies are the essential ingredient in the growth of plants and the welfare of the vegetable kingdom. Dowding never lost his deep affection for the men he commanded, and they returned this affection to him. In 1968, he was determined to provide his expertise and perspective on the battle during the production of the classic war movie Battle of Britain, despite being wheelchair-bound with arthritis. He met with Sir Laurence Olivier, who had been tasked with playing the part of Dowding in the film. Olivier said to Dowding with characteristic self-deprecation that he had been sat behind Dowding's desk all day pretending to be you, and making an awful mess of it too, to which Dowding smiled kindly before saying, "Oh, I'm sure you are," to howls of laughter from the crew and other technical advisors, some of whom had been under his command, and one in fact who had been an adversary in 1940. Hugh Dowding died peacefully aged 87 in 1970. Today, his contribution to the survival of the Allied cause in 1940 is far better recognised than it ever was in his lifetime. If Dowding's beliefs about the realm of the spirits is correct, he at least knows that his heroic place in history is finally secure.
I would like to think that this man, in his death, was reunited with all of his chicks.
I would like to think so too.
I would like to think that he was able to find all of those boys that had died and say, "I'm sorry," because that it feels like that was what he needed.
I think it's saying, "I'm sorry, but it needed to happen."
Yeah, not "I'm sorry" as in, I should never have done it. They were all doing their jobs, right? But I'm sorry that you had to die for this.
Yeah. I think I'm with you on that.
Do you know what I mean?
If you saw a photograph of him, maybe we'll have a look at that in a moment. He does look like the most straight-laced conservative man you could ever imagine.
That's why I imagine all military men of that class.
Thin-faced, broom handle moustache, very kind of sad look in the eyes. He'd been through a lot in his life. But actually to know that he was such an advocate for animal welfare and things at a time when people just didn't care about that stuff.
Which I think is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And also obviously I'm a big fan of fairies, and I think people forget that at this period of time people are wildly interested in spiritualism. So while among his peers, his military peers, they're gonna, he's a crank, he's whatever. Those views, they were not that abnormal.
Well, actually, he had enemies in Parliament who were actively highlighting this stuff to discredit him.
Yeah.
But he was always, well, do what you like. I believe it.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure about that, here's 4 books on the subject.
And we were talking earlier about the Cottingley fairies, the Cottingley fairy photographs. I can't remember what period of time that happened in. It was
about 30 years earlier than this, but yeah.
But in that period of time, like genuinely well-educated people, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, W.B. Yeats, they believed this. Like, they believed these pictures. It wasn't like people were all kind of sniggering behind their hats. Some people were, of course they were, because they didn't believe it. But actually there were sections of well-educated, intelligent people who firmly believed that this was happening, that fairies were real. I also love that he was like, fairies keep the natural world in order. That's like a really old Irish folkloric belief. Yeah. That fairies are the guardians of the natural world. If you're friends with them,
that's why, like the onions we saw in the Dig for Victory garden earlier, that's why they get so
onions
big.
the size of your head.
Oh, they really were. They were something else.
They were enormous.
Talk about a tangent, but
they were the biggest onions I've ever seen.
If we wanted to steal them, we wouldn't have been able to carry
them.
No, I
wouldn't be. I'd be dragging them out, like comically.
Yeah.
Trying to drag it out while the guy's going, "Please stop trying to steal my onions."
Yeah. I told him good work, and he says, "It's not work, it's a hobby."
I know.
Do you know what? I think you'd have got on with Dowding there.
Yeah, I thought it was really
lovely.
lovely.
We met a lot of lovely people today, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
a lot of really nice people. But I think what you said is very interesting, that it's about guilt.
Yes.
And about sadness and regret. And like you said, I don't for a second think that he was like, oh, I should never have done that, whatever. He was doing his job.
Absolutely.
As were all the people around him.
Oh, he could be hard-nosed with that side of
Yeah.
things. I mean, the system of air defence we have in this country today is just an updated version of what he did because it still works.
And clearly, he got to that point in his military career because he was hard-nosed.
Yeah.
You couldn't be a soft person
Yeah.
and achieve those things because you have to sacrifice people, which is an awful thing to say.
Awful, but true.
But it is also true. But of course, he was also human and clearly very empathetic to the world around him. So obviously you're going to be thinking, I'm carrying the weight of the loss of these lives on my shoulders.
I'm going to make sure, though, that it's as few lives as possible. And I've got a lot of time for doubting. I always think about his contribution to the Battle of Britain film. We saw one of the aircraft that took part in the filming of that today, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
But his involvement was there technically as like a technical and tactical advisor to say, yeah, this is how we did it.
Yeah.
But you really got the sense from anything that you read about his contribution to it. He was really there just making sure that his lads were being done right by.
Yeah.
And he would quite openly claim that, well, they've asked me to do it in this way. They would like you to do it in this way. So he very much was there as a representative of those lads who he felt he was still in contact with, to make sure that they were getting their sense of justice in film form. And it's a pretty incredible film if you see it. It's it's pretty thin in terms of plot, but it's all filmed with real aircraft, and it does try to do a job of telling a truthful story of what happened, as far as you could in the 1960s, eh?
As far as you could.
Yeah. I've got one thing I'd just like to conclude with.
Oh, go on.
So concludes this summary of just a few of the ghostly remnants of the world's first decisive battle fought entirely in the air. It feels appropriate to end with a poem that many people will have a passing familiarity with, albeit in very different context. In the aftermath of the Challenger space shuttle tragedy of 1986, President Ronald Reagan reached for some of these lines as he attempted to reflect the shock and grief of the nation at the loss of those 7 brave astronauts. What few would have realised was that those words were composed by an American airman who died in a flying accident in 1941. John Gillespie Magee was, like several of his countrymen, serving with the Royal Canadian Air Force in Britain. He wrote this poem as a reflection of his joy at flying a Spitfire fighter for the first time, and the complex and conflicting emotions that this entailed. His sonnet to a Spitfire is called High Flight, and it reads: "Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth, and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Someward I've climbed, and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along, and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up the long, delirious burning blue, I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while, with silent lifting mind, I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God."
Oh, no, that's a poem.
That's a poem.
That's a beautiful poem.
Have you heard it before?
No, I haven't. I haven't heard it at all.
It's the first and last line is what Reagan said after the Challenger space shuttle disaster. "I've slipped the surly bonds of earth, put out my hand and touched the face of God." He paraphrased that. And it was written by an American Spitfire volunteer at a time before the Americans had even entered the war.
And he was going, look, this is fucking terrifying, but my God,
it's a joy. Yeah.
being in the air like this. It must have been a joy.
You saw a Spitfire flying over us today.
Yes.
And it's a machine that holds a symbolic importance to many British people. And the sound of it. And then you heard a gentleman who we don't even know talking about it. But at the end of the day, these are young lads alone in those cockpits doing all of this.
Yeah.
And for him to come up with that.
Stunning.
Do you know what? There's nothing more I can add to that.
What a way to end. Tim, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
It's been lovely to be here in person.
Yeah, I know. It's so weird to have you here in person. It is so... I'm currently on the sofa in a blanket with a cup of
With a
coffee.
cuppa, yeah.
Yeah, listening to you tell stories, and I've loved it. It's been an absolute joy. And I do think going to that museum today
It helped, didn't it?
was a really good idea
Yeah.
because it helped me to contextualize and have a framework for things. If people want to hear your dulcet tones elsewhere, where can they find you?
Well, they can do that on my YouTube channel, which is Mr. Cloke History on YouTube. And you know what? I'm going to be really, really out there and just beg. Please subscribe. At the moment, it's geared towards British school history exams, and as a result, at this precise moment in time, I'm really losing subscribers because kids have finished their exams. They don't want to be thinking about history anymore. But of course, that makes YouTube and the algorithms associated with it think that I must have posted something awful. But there's loads of stuff up there. I've got some true crime stuff up there. I've got all sorts of historical videos on there. And if you want to know a little bit more about the Battle of Britain itself, I have some videos which help demonstrate that in a really accessible way. And you can kind of use it as your own podcast as well. But I basically do this in my spare time as a bit of a hobby, don't I? And I really enjoy my opportunities to record with you. You know how much I do because we are just mates at the end of the day, aren't we? But if you've enjoyed it and you'd like to hear more, go there and please like, subscribe, engage with it, and just help remind YouTube that I'm still alive.
Obviously, the links to everything will be in the description of this video. So I'm making it as easy for you as possible. Please go and subscribe.
Thank you very much, guys.
Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure. I adore you. These episodes are among my favourites because I just get to sit here and listen to you tell a story, which is lovely.
I'm sad it's over. And I'm
Yeah,
also
me
sad that you're
too.
going to have to give me a lift to the station in a minute because I'm off to Devon.
Oh, I know. That's so grim,
I
isn't
know.
it? That
It's
you're
like
going back to
literally in
Devon.
half an hour time. I'm gone.
I know. It's so annoying. But we did get to get drunk
Yeah,
in the pub.
we did.
We went to a museum.
Yeah.
We recorded an episode. You met Mr. Hades.
Yes.
Life is good.
We've had a blast.
We've had a blast. Tim, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Cheers, dears.